So I want to thank Michael, Stacy, Matt, John, and Brent for the hard work they do every day. And we look forward to hearing from them today on this segment called the New Jersey Reporters Forum. Be a little remiss if I didn't say this is the first forum that we have had since the passing of Michael Aaron, who rightfully so was called the Dean of New Jersey's State House Press Corps. He led this Reporters Forum many times. He actually was a keynote speaker at one of our Walk to Washington dinners. He was a great guy, a great friend of all of us, a great supporter of the state of New Jersey. We miss him, and we will continue to miss him forever. So today we're going to have a lot of things covered. There's no shortage of news in Trenton and the state. We have the presidential election coming up. We have an interesting Senate race. We have an interesting House race in District 7. We have the state budget looming, which could be an exciting time. We have the World Cup coming. And then we have the gubernatorial race, which could be the cherry on the cake on the Sunday for all this. So we're going to get into all that probably, or at least most of that. But before we do, I want to thank our sponsor, Archer and Griner PC. Archer has been a great supporter of the chamber and a great corporate citizen of New Jersey for many, many years. And we want to thank Archer for sponsoring today's event. So to kick this off and to moderate the event today, I'm going to introduce Michael Shapiro, the CEO and publisher of Tap Into, the network of more than 95 franchised online local newspapers. So Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you run the festivities today.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, and good morning, everybody, and really excited to be here. And we have a stellar panel, which I'll introduce today. Leading off panel, Stacy Sherman, senior editor, the America's News Desk at Bloomberg News. And Stacy was also the New Jersey Chamber's Women of Influence Award winner just last week. So congratulations, Stacy. We also have with us Matt Fazelpour, staff writer for government and economic development at NJ Biz. We have Brent Johnson, politics reporter at the Star Ledger and NJ.com. And rounding out the panel, we have John Reitmeyer, budget and public finance writer for the New Jersey Spotlight News. So welcome, panelists. Welcome to everyone here today. And we're going to kick it off talking about, I've been told that there's a presidential election going on. So I think we'll start there. So I know, during the campaign, we've had President $1,000 cap on a federal tax deduction known as SALT. He's also recently talked about the possibility of eliminating federal income taxes. So I want to, direct the question to Brent, if he'd like to kick it off, is, Trump obviously says a lot of things. He talks a lot when he's in front of people. And so are these campaign ploys, or is he serious about either of these?
It's always very hard to telegraph, despite the fact that he's supposed to be a straight shooter. It's hard to telegraph exactly what Trump is going to do. I could see him letting this expire, but him passing a new round of tax cuts. He got a lot of blowback, including from people in his own party, about the SALT deduction. I could see him letting that slide and maybe doing some form of new tax cut package if he's elected. Just SALT seems so radioactive. But there is a lot of grievance politics in this campaign, and it could continue to be a way to punish blue states, which is what Democrats say it is.
Any other panelists want to weigh in?
And SALT has maintained, as Brent said, a kind of a radioactive issue, and potent issue that has galvanized, especially Democrats on it. So it's interesting to hear the juxtaposition now of that. Now you want to just eliminate the deduction that was put into place with the last legislation. So I don't know. I think there's just a lot of ideas and campaign ploys being kind of thrown around and just seeing what sticks at this time.
Yeah. Now let's also talk about Vice President Harris. She's called for expansion of the federal child tax credit and also for tax credits for first-time homebuyers. So, John, what do you think? Is this something that's good for New Jersey? And do you think that if she is elected, whether she'll be able to implement either of these things?
Well, I think then that's what I was going to add to the SALT conversation is it's hard to talk about a lot of these proposals without recognizing that we're likely to have a really close divided Congress. The House races, how the House shakes out is going to be important to watch in the Senate as well. And so it's nice for the candidates to have these proposals. And I'm glad we're focusing on their actual proposals instead of, say, their personalities or what the latest poll says. Certainly trying to address New Jersey has an affordable housing issue, whether you're a renter or whether you own a home. Incidentally, the SALT deduction goes to that in some ways because the $10,000 limit, the average New Jersey property tax bill is just about $10,000 now. And in many North Jersey communities, you're over that limit just on a modest home. So the SALT plays into that conversation, but helping first-time homebuyers, especially in a place like New Jersey where home prices are relatively expensive compared to the rest of the nation. I mean, when we talk to a lot of young people, they are struggling to get into home ownership. And they're spending a lot of money on rent that's not going to anything, they're not building any equity with their rent payments. So I think that does have an opportunity to resonate in a place like New Jersey. We're not the only state where it's expensive to live, but certainly we have higher prices than a lot of places. So yes, to the first part of your question and your question, absolutely it matters what happens to Congress, because we've seen divided government both in New Jersey and for the last several years at the national level, and we see the type of gridlock that can happen. There's opportunity for gridlock even when it's all the same part. And when you have any division, it just, getting anything over the finish line. There was an immigration deal that didn't make it over the finish line. So it just, it's great that we're talking about these proposals, but there's that caveat that it all depends on what happens with the Congress.
That's an excellent point. And, I think when you're thinking about the election and the two candidates, who do you think is better for New Jersey's economy? I'll throw this one to Stacey, see if she has a thought on it.
Well, let me just say, when you have questions about New Jersey's economy, like I saw this question might come up, I went right over to NJ Spotlight and read John Reitmeyer's latest story. I recommend everyone do that. I mean, it's very hard to say. I think John outlined some of the big issues. I mean, when it comes down to it, we all want lower taxes, right? And New Jersey needs lower taxes more than most states, or any state, I would say. But on the surface, I mean, that's on the surface. So lower taxes sound great. Trump has certainly put forward a lot of lower taxes, but the reality is you have to pay for them. And so, he could say whatever he wants to say, and it sounds great, but funding it and getting it passed, as John said, is a whole other story. And then Kamala has talked about, the credits, and all that is great stuff, but we're in a campaign. I mean, I can't tell you how many campaigns I've covered and how few of those campaign promises actually get done. So I have no firm answer for you.
And, one of the things I saw Harris propose recently was support for caregivers. I think probably all of us on this panel are in the situation where our parents are aging and we're having to deal with those kinds of issues. So, Matt, how does that play, you think, in a state like New Jersey, where there's a large senior citizen population, as well as states like Florida? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it's an issue that resonates for sure. I mean, I dealt with the passing of my dad a few years back, which a little bit sooner than we would have hoped with cancer. And it was, a gutting experience. So as this is something that no doubt hits everybody. So I think it's at least a smart issue to raise on the campaign. But again, I mean, it's just as kind of to back what John kind of laid out, it's just in such a divided time. I mean, really, the Senate and House are going to come down to an absolute razor's edge one way or the other. Right, the Senate map probably favors Republicans. House map probably favors Dems. So, seeing what can get done or not is going to be, a whole other task. But I think raising issues like home ownership, family caregiving, those are smart issues to raise because they do hit into no matter what party you are, what state you live in, where what your background is, that hits into everybody.
Yeah. Now, you were talking about the Razor's Edge. So throw this question out. So we all have heard about what happened at Madison Square Garden the other night. Do you feel an October surprise that, every election there's an October surprise? Was the MSG rally the October surprise? Brent, what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a sway. It certainly wasn't. I was saying this before we got on air that it certainly wasn't a great thing for Donald Trump. I mean, it riles up his base and maybe ensures that more of his base may get. But I'm heading to Allentown later today to cover his rally for our sister paper, the Easton Express Times, and they have 15% of their voting bloc is Puerto Rican, Latino and Puerto Rican. And they did a story today about how just everyone's riled up by this, and that I don't know if it will make people change their vote. It may inspire more Latinos to come out of anger. So it certainly that wasn't a good thing. The joke that was made by the comedian, but you never know. How many of us went into election night in 2016 and thought Donald Trump was going to win? I've learned never to underestimate national politics in the last 8 years. Anything can happen. And I really think this race is very close, and we won't know on election night. We probably won't know. Maybe we didn't know till Saturday, I think it was, that Joe Biden had beaten Donald Trump. So I think you could have a similar outcome now. But yeah, that rally was definitely a tipping point and tough to come a week before election day.
Yeah. Now, I guess, Matt, do you think there's going to be any other October surprise coming up before the election, or you think that was it?
I mean, seemingly every news cycle at this point, there's something that I thought wasn't possible the day before or the hour before. This again, I don't know if this is the quote October surprise or not, that this rally, but it seemed pretty egregious and unforced error type, to even, and especially, Latino men could determine this election. The margins are so tight. The whole thing just kind of mind blowing, but I still expect like 3 or 4 more things that, again, were not probably possible, in the news cycle before, in this next week. It's just been that wild.
Yeah, no, I know, Stacey, you've been covering politics a long time. What did you see anything different this year than in previous years, or this year versus 4 years ago, that you thought was interesting from a journalist perspective in terms of media or coverage or anything like that?
I don't know where to begin. I've never been more disgusted. And I'm not talking about a particular party, but I just feel like a lot of insults, personal insults, to the point shocking. I don't know. I think that is what has marked for me this campaign. Also, I have never seen America so divided. It is so stark, and people are so convinced. That's why I think the Madison Square Garden thing isn't really going to have a huge effect, because there's always I'm watching on Twitter for response, and anyone who likes Trump is going to continue to like Trump. The minds are made up. I think largely minds are made up, and I'm not sure this will convince a Trump fan to no longer be a Trump fan. So I think those are the two things that have really that I've seen in this campaign.
Brent, I know in recent days there's been a lot of controversy about the LA Times and then the Washington Post, not endorsing, and it appears because of the publisher saying not to endorse to the editorial staff. Do you think that, what do you think about that? And 2, do you think that's a trend that's going to continue? And what do you think what's the impact on our politics of that?
It's strange because I'm 41, and for most of my life, it was a really big deal when a newspaper would endorse a candidate. We used to do it at the college paper when I was at Rutgers 20 years ago. It was, it was a big deal. You'd sit around the editorial board and would come up with an endorsement, and it helped drive, public opinion. There's a growing thought that maybe newspaper endorsements, 1, aren't as powerful as they used to be, and 2, should newspapers be giving their opinion like that? Does that sway coverage at a time when media organizations are held to a standard where people are angry about coverage, fair or not? But what it did do was it drew attention. It almost not endorsing drew more attention than them endorsing. That it almost brought the issue to an even sharper. The layman people in the United States are paying attention to the newspaper endorsements, though. But it's a snapshot of how everything is an issue these days. As Stacey said, it's so divided, and people are so dug in on their opinions. I don't know if a newspaper endorsement is going to change people's minds, but it certainly will get people talking about how divided things are. It really is remarkable how, and it's, you can say social media and the internet, everybody can go to their corner of the internet and have their views reinforced and believe what they want to believe. And there's very few things in the middle that can change that these days. It's tiring at the end of the day.
Matt, we talked about, the economy and which presidential candidate will impact New Jersey's economy. But outside of the economy, are there any other issues in the presidential election that you think are relevant to the people of New Jersey, and depending on who wins the presidential election would impact the residents of New Jersey?
I mean, as far as impact, right? I mean, I'm looking at things like energy policy, right? Infrastructure dollars. I mean, that would be the two things that when I just polling around, as I'm sure everybody on this call does, when you talk to just different leaders and different organizations, if there was a change from, because while Harris would have a different administration from Biden in some respects, I think it would be, along a similar track per se, whereas President Trump would have a whole different kind of, and those, so if that changeover happened and President Trump, retakes the White House, energy and infrastructure dollars. I mean, Gateway comes to mind. I mean, that is fully funded now and needs to be locked in. But if a new administration came in and wanted to hold up a mega project, I imagine there are ways that can happen. So, and obviously the energy policies would, in terms of what President Biden and Governor Murphy have going on, that would be a way the President Trump administration and a Republican administration coming in next year in New Jersey. So those are two areas where I'm kind of keeping a close eye on.
And now, John, in terms of what's going on with the economy, inflation obviously was very high. It's come down. The economic indicators are starting to move in the right direction. So project out. We're after Inauguration Day, and we have a new president, whether it's Harris or Trump. Does Biden get any credit if the economy is better in January, February, or March? Or is it whoever's in the White House when the economy gets to that point? Are they the beneficiary of the improved economy at that point?
I think that's a really good question, because a lot of the metrics and the rate of inflation has slowed just about to where the Fed wants it. But, in the main, we still have those elevated prices. We haven't had inflation actually reverse. We've just had the rate slow down. So for a lot of people, they're feeling those increased costs, and it's not too far removed from the last. Now, they might not recognize that there's also been healthy wage growth, or that might not weigh so much in their mind as some of the increased prices that they still see, or, how much it costs to finance a car these days, add in the interest rate costs. So for a lot of people, even though a lot of the metrics are either improved or actually in a pretty good place, I mean, usually when we have the stock market today, gas prices where they are today, unemployment where it is today, the incumbent would usually get a lot of credit for that, because it's been harder, say, than that cycle a few years ago where the House races were really hinging on frustration with the economy. I like the phrase vibes that was tossed around a lot in some of these years coming out of the worst of COVID, because as things have sort of skewed better, it's that people just still don't really feel it in a lot of ways. So it'll be interesting to see if we get to a new president coming in, and then if sort of Biden starts to get more credit about where things were left. And remember where things were when what he inherited. But we're kind of had the luxury of being able to have that conversation, not being in those horrendous conditions we were in when he first took office. So I think that's a really good question. It'll be a way. I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that one. And who wins could could sway the needle a little bit as well. But certainly, I think economy in this election is still a big issue. But normally these types of metrics, like I said, if we put inflation to the side a little bit, would be good for the incumbent or the incumbent party. But I don't know that the incumbent party is really getting that type of tailwind right now.
And before we leave presidential politics, just want to take a spot poll of the panel. 10 years from now, what will President Biden's approval rating be? Stacey.
Oh my.
Right now, it's like 38 to 42. So just for everybody in the audience.
I'll say 50. Yeah.
How about you, Matt?
I'll say 45.
And Brent?
It sounds about right. Probably between 40 and 50. Presidents time goes on, they tend to be viewed more favorably unless you're James Buchanan.
And round it off with John.
I'll take the under on Stacey.
That sounds great.
Smart bet.
And for all of the folks watching today, you can feel free to put questions in chat. We'll try to get to them as best we can. We're going to move on to the U.S. Senate election and touch on that. So as everybody knows, it's Andy Kim against Curtis Bashaw. Andy Kim, congressman, and he took on the party line, defeated the party line, and then got the Democratic nomination over the First Lady, and now he's running in the general election against Curtis Bashaw, who's a hotelier down from Cape May County, very involved in Cape May County, and so I wanted to get people's take on the race. Is there a race in people's views, and how close do you think it's going to be, Brent?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a moving target over time, because if you asked me a few months ago, the polls showed that it was in single digits, and Democrats were telling me privately, like, this race is, he's going to win, but it's not going to be a slam dunk. I think it's starting to change. There hasn't really been a lot of polling in the race, but Menendez didn't run as independent. Harris replaced Biden on the ticket. Republicans haven't won a Senate seat in New Jersey since 1972, which in context was 2 years after the Beatles broke up. It's a long time ago. So that's a tough streak to break. And this was the year Republicans thought they could have done it with the stench of Menendez. This was the time to do it. But Kim has made a name for himself. Bashaw, by all accounts, has been a very good candidate, but I don't know if that streak's going to end. But this has been a very interesting race because it has not been a knockdown drag out. There have been some tense moments, but it's been both candidates promising change and kind of being relatively cordial with each other. It's an interesting race. I don't know if it's a crazy heat.
And now, Matt, do you think should Kim win? Do you think that he is going to be a reformer in the U.S. Senate, or do you think he's going to become part of the old boys club that exists there, and has existed for centuries?
He seems to have an independent streak. And I mean, just to echo what Brent was saying, that's one of the things that stood out, though, that the race has not gotten in the dirt, in the mud, really. I mean, it has stayed pretty much above board. It's been kind of a good old school, tough campaign, but not crossing lines per se. I mean, look, he's taken on now the machine with the county line. He went against the governor's wife in a primary. So he's proven that, if he were to win, as the question is, I mean, I don't know how much a reformer, Senate, things tend to move slow there. So it's very tough to do that, just how, the institution is set up. But I mean, he has shown so far, to be formidable politically and not really scared to take on battles. So I would expect him to have a prominent voice, but again, within the confines of a Senate arrangement, that's kind of tough to get things done.
Yeah. Anyone else want to weigh in on the U.S. Senate election?
I'll say that I think if Andy Kim were not as liked and popular as he is, that the Republican would have more of a chance. But he has a follow. I'm in South Jersey, and he has a following. This is where he's from. People love him. I'm not saying everyone loves him, but there's a big group that really is pushing for him. He strikes me. You said with the old boys club, he doesn't go. He does his own way, right? Like he genuinely thinks about things, and he votes what he wants to do. And I don't see him falling into that. That has been said though before. I've said that about other people before. You never know in politics. But he seems, I think in general, just that he seems to have a good chance of winning.
Last thing I'll say about the Senate election, I had a source mention to me that he seems like the right Republican at the wrong time. He seems like the kind of Republican who would have done crazy well in New Jersey 20 years ago. But with Donald Trump in New Jersey being a radioactive figure, that could bring him down unfairly, because even though he said he'll vote for Trump, he's walked a tightrope on Trump. But that's, Bashaw definitely, I mean, even Democrats have good things to say about Bashaw. It's just that it's tough to beat that losing streak in this climate.
Yeah, now, in New Jersey, we used to have, back in the day, we used to have competitive congressional races. There used to be several of them throughout the state. Today, it's really one, which is the 7th congressional, where we have incumbent Congressman Tom Kean against challenger Sue Altman. Matt, can you weigh in on that race, and what do you think are the key issues there?
Well, you could see, again, we were talking at the top about how tight, the House and Senate are going to be. So in the House, I mean, just the flood of ads that have come in on this race. I mean, the battlegrounds are the national money is flying into these few battleground seats, which this has become. I mean, it kind of is like the prototypical, kind of where we're at in the current divide. You have Altman about getting guns off the streets, women's rights, and Kean about crime, securing the border. So it's kind of this matchup of where both parties, and especially the bases, are at right now. So, I mean, it's an interesting standoff, but I mean, you could just, again, see the importance of, again, California, New York have some of these battleground seats, but I mean, this happens to be the one in New Jersey where the national money is flooding in. And unlike the Kim race we were just talking about, the Kim Bashaw race, this has gotten a little bit uglier, as and especially I would expect that to ratchet up over the next few days.
Yeah, now it was interesting because in the 2023 election, both in Summit and in Westfield, Republicans made significant gains there, largely because of economic issues. So I'll throw this one to John. How do you think that's going to impact the Kean-Altman race, given that both of those towns are in the 7th congressional district?
Yeah, I think it depends on what this, as Matt was referring to, is sort of what issues carry the day in voters' minds. Because you have Altman, and funny because the last cycle I was in this district, and now I didn't move, but the district moved away from me. So I'm unfortunately in that situation where I'm still seeing those ads. More and more, I'm fleeing to streaming service with no ads this time of the year, just so I can tune out all the nonsense. But I'm not getting the mailers, gratefully, but I'm still seeing some of the noise, and I don't get to vote in this one anymore. I think, it goes back to what we were talking about before. Is this going to be are voters going to predominantly? Is it going to be an economy election? Is Altman going to be able to convince voters that it's an abortion rights election? Is it some other issue? Some of the ones that Congressman Kean has been talking about. I think that remains to be seen. I mean, what I think will be interesting will just be, once all is said and done, once all the money gets spent, all the ads are aired, we know the breakdown of this district sort of electorally, how much off of those percentages will be when the final votes are tallied. Are people generally still voting by party and checking to see if that R or D is next to the name? And a lot of normal people don't really pay too much attention to a lot of the stuff that we unfortunately talk about and write about. And then they might go and on election day, or even now, we were talking about October surprise. I mean, there's voting's already underway. So in some ways, October is too late for that surprise. It'll be interesting for me to see the final number. And is it just going to be one of those elections where, because of the division, people are going in voting for the party that they favor and sort of discounting who the actual candidates are?
Brent, recently the DCCC put this on their really targeted list. It hadn't been, and now they're funneling a lot of money into the race. So do you think that, why do you think that that's the case? Do you think it's because they've seen some internal polling or something like that that said, hey, this is much closer than we thought it was?
There are a few things. One, that's true. The race ended up being, I don't know if they thought this race was as close, even though we've been saying it's been close for a while. I don't know if they thought so. Then I had also had sources telling me that Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi had wanted to keep a lot of the money in California and New York for the close races there. And I heard that Governor Murphy made a personal phone call to Hakeem Jeffries and said, hey, we have a really important race here and, it could help tip the House. And that he got involved and that helped there too. But this is definitely, one of the handful of races to definitely watch across the country. New Jersey is in many ways blessed to have something that is that important to an election that will tip what happens in New Jersey will help determine who is in the House next year or who controls the House next year.
Yeah, and jumping back to the Andy Kim Curtis Bachelor race, because we had a question in chat, and I'll throw this one to Matt. So recently, Governor Murphy endorsed Andy Kim. Do you feel it was a full-throated endorsement, or do you think he was just doing it for window dressing?
Yeah, I'm sure there's still some, some I don't want to call it bad blood, but there's some wounds, raw wounds there in that situation. But I think at the end of the day, Murphy is a party guy, so he's going to do what needs to be done to try to move his party along in this kind of situation, especially in such a tight environment, and put any personal things past. But probably not his most full-throated of other endorsements. He's actually given a pretty full-throated endorsement to Sue Altman, so you can see a kind of a little bit of contrast there.
Yeah. No. Anybody else want to weigh in on the House race between Kaine and Altman before we move on?
I'll weigh in on Murphy's endorsement.
Oh, please, Stacey. Yeah.
I'll just say, politics is politics. His term ends next year, and his marriage is going to continue, right? And so he has a couple of different people to please, and that includes his wife. That's all I'm going to say.
I wrote about this a little bit in my story on Sunday on this race. It's like a strange bedfellow. Democrats aren't going to fight against Andy Kim. He took down more importantly than Tammy Murphy, he took down the powers estate, and not everybody's happy about that. They're sitting. No one's sitting on their hands, but they are sitting with sour grapes in their pockets. But they're not going to fight against it with the Senate on the line. And Murphy was always he's always said he was going to vote for Kim. That's that wasn't a shock. It's just that he wasn't. And I'd also heard that some people thought Andy Kim really didn't go after his endorsement and kind of said to every Democrat, I don't really need your help. And some people were kind of put off by that. So but again, Andy Kim, if he wants to, could have this, as long as this streak continues, could have this even the next 30 years. So Democrats, they're going to find a way to get along. This is not the first time something like this has happened. The joke in politics is that everybody loves each other and everybody hates each other. So.
Yeah, and I think Brent's right. From Andy Kim's perspective, it's his brand to not necessarily be endorsed by the establishment, by the machine, by the heads of, we're coming off of Menendez. And what better way to separate yourself from the party that gave us Bob Menendez than to say, I didn't even get endorsed by the governor, who's the highest ranking Democrat in the state in New Jersey. So it's almost played really well for Andy Kim to keep having headlines saying, Murphy hasn't endorsed Kim for so long.
That's a great point. And, one of the things that we can look forward to after this November election is the gubernatorial election next year. So just as we're recovering from this election, we can get into another one. So already the race is starting to form. We have a number of names, City Mayor Steve Fulop, former Senate President Steve Sweeney, Newark Mayor Ross Baraka, Montclair Mayor Sean Spiller, and the possibility of Congresswoman Sherrill or Congressman Gottheimer joining the race. How do you think the race is keeping up on the Democratic side of the ledger? And I'll go to Brent with this.
All right, so I don't think anybody's prepared for what this 2020 race. We've not seen a governor's race like this in our lifetime. Not just is there not only are there a lot of people running, like the most famous political are running, the mayor of the two largest cities, the former state Senate president, two members of Congress. It's just on the Democratic side. The Republican side is a whole other host. It is going to be an insane race, just out there. So much so that we're launching a new newsletter in the new year, mostly on this race, the 2025 race. So, and yeah, right now it's very early because so many people are still focused on the presidential race. But governor is an important thing that people pay attention to. And I don't know if everybody's going to make it to the finish line of the primary. And in fact, you could argue that the two most likely biggest candidates on the Democratic side haven't even jumped in yet, in Mikey Sherrill and Josh Gottheimer. So much so that there was talk that they wanted one of those two to run for Senate, and that both of them said no, we want to run for governor. So, which is kind of how we got him. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be a knockdown drag out, and you're already starting to see signs of that because you see Fulop and Gottheimer squawking, and Baraka chiming in all the time on Twitter, and then on the Republican side, you have people calling each other rhinos already. It's going to be nuts.
Stacey, Fulop has started to recruit candidates to run for assembly and state senate offline, for assembly in particular, or I shouldn't say offline because there aren't any lines. How do you think that is going to impact things? And do you think the other candidates are going to do the same thing? So could we see, for example, some assembly races in primaries where for lines of candidates on the Democratic side running against each other, endorsed by the gubernatorial candidate that they're kind of bracketed with, or however they're going to try to do this?
I sure hope so. I mean, how fun will that be to cover? But also, I mean, it's just the fact that there's so many people in there. I hope it is a competitive race. We've seen too many times where just like the race is decided like years before, it's an actual race. I know like Fulop has wanted this for so long. Like he wanted it years ago, and then he got convinced by Murphy or Murphy's Money or something that it was easy. He wants it. I mean, there's so many people. I really, I think it's going to be a fun race to watch, to cover too.
Yeah, no, Matt, on the Republican side, we already have, Jack Ciattarelli, Senator Bramnick, former state senator Ed Durr, and then conservative radio host Bill Spadea. I always massacre his name. But yeah. So how does the Republican side shape out, or shape out, you think, Matt, based on where we are right now?
Yeah, I mean, the Republican primaries, again, for the last decade have revolved around kind of loyalty to Donald Trump, and just that is kind of the center of it all. You have my former 1015 colleague Bill Spadea and Ed Durr, who are Trump ride or die. Ciattarelli has gotten there. He wasn't necessarily there and was kind of toeing the line a bit in his last race, but he's kind of there. And then you have Bramnick, who's running as the old school before Donald Trump Republican, which, I mean, we'll see if that has not necessarily played in a lot of these big races. But I mean, that's on that side of things, that is going to be the centerpiece. So if the presidential election, I believe will have a lot. The outcome of that will have a lot to do with shaping how the Republican and where the party is at or not at post this election, and that will dictate a lot of just the MAGA aspect of the Republican Party is obviously it's there now. So in some any candidate is going to have to adapt to that, but to the extent I think will depend on how this presidential election turned out, and just on the Democratic side. I mean, just echo kind of what Brett said at the top. Yeah, I mean, that race is going to be wild. I mean, you just have a lot of name power, a lot of money, a lot of North Jersey money and power brokers, and constituencies overlapping. So that's going to be a fascinating race. The whole thing is going to be, but prepare, because I agree, it's going to be like just unloading right after this presidential election, especially when Gottheimer and Sherrill are likely to join the fray.
Yeah, now Brent, we talked about earlier about how if that Bashaw, if he wasn't running in a Trump year, might do better. How do you feel that plays out with Bramnick? Because Bramnick obviously would be running next year. Trump's not on the ballot. So do you see any difference there?
Yeah, the problem will be getting through the primary, especially without the line. Without the line, when everybody's on relatively equal footing, can he convince enough? Will he be able to get enough of the MAGA base that will still be there, whether Donald Trump is president or not? There will still be people feeling the after effects of the Trump era. Will they go for a guy who's been so openly anti-Trump? And that's the thing, is you could win a primary with Donald Trump support and then flame out in the general election, because there's not enough MAGA people in the state. You know, I always talk to people who down in South Jersey, like, well, don't you see all the Trump flags in Ocean County? I'm like, well, those are small pockets of the state where he has a lot of support. Statewide, being a Donald Trump candidate just has not proven to be successful in New Jersey. So you could have something where someone like Spadia ekes out of the primary with the support of MAGA voters, but then faces a tough time in the general election. Or if the party has to go, maybe let's nominate someone who's a moderate because that is the best chance of winning. Because we've seen moderates win the governorship in New Jersey many times. Christy Whitman, Tom Kean, Chris Christie. You know, we go back and forth a lot in this state. So it would be a lot harder to do that as a MAGA Republican. So a lot hinges on the primary.
Does anybody else have anything they want to share about the upcoming gubernatorial race?
I mean, I think I would just say, like, along the lines of what Matt and Brent have said, that the effects of we can't minimize the effects of the presidential election. And, you know, if Trump were to lose, would that cause the party to sort of break the fever of Trump that's been in place for the last almost a decade now, and swing in another direction? In that case, John Bramnick is sitting pretty. If Trump were to win, then would our election become a referendum on sort of Trump policies that are being enacted at the federal level? We haven't talked about tariffs yet, but some policies that have the potential to have a big impact on our lives. Is there blowback? And New Jersey's the first bellwether of that, because we have the governor's race coming right after a presidential election. So it's really hard to minimize the effect of what happens nationally in terms of what direction.
And one of the big issues I think in the gubernatorial race that'll be coming up has to do with the budget gap. So, you know, tax receipts are up about 4%, which is good. However, there's like a $2 billion gap there, and it's likely going to. And you know, the pandemic aid is gone, so this is likely going to be a major gubernatorial issue. So, John, what do you think about that, and kind of where do you see that playing out for the gubernatorial race?
Yeah, you know, kind of the national candidates don't talk about debt anymore or Social Security, even though they are huge issues. I don't know necessarily that and it's a structural gap in the budget right now. We don't have an actual gap between revenues and expenditures from a structural standpoint, only because they have a lot of surplus. And baked into this budget is a plan to spend down surplus, even though they also bake in year-over-year revenue growth. So anyone who's watching who runs a business knows that can't do that for too long. I don't know, though, that we're going to get to that level. I mean, I would love it as a budget writer if, you know, it's a budget election. I don't know that we're going to get to that level of specificity. And just like we hear presidential candidates talk about tax cuts because people like to hear, especially in a period of elevated costs, about ways that you're going to cut the taxes I pay. I imagine as we get closer to the general election in our gubernatorial race, there may be more talk about, you know, we've already writing about a big promised senior property tax break that we don't know where the money is for it after 1 year. So, you know, if the budget issues are going to be there no matter what, right? I mean, New Jersey always is a state that is usually dysfunctional when it comes to even how the budget comes together. We have heard some of the Democratic candidates talking about the budget process. Actually, we've heard some of the Republican candidates. So I should take back a little bit of my pessimism at the beginning, because we have had a little bit of discussion of the budget already in the early days of this election. I don't know that it'll be the prevailing issue. And there's a lot to happen still with this current fiscal year. I mean, we're just a quarter of the way in, more or less. At the rate of growth that they're seeing, they're on their numbers, which is always a good thing, right? You always want to be on your projections. But the problem is that baked in structural gap. So if they don't get growth at a faster clip than what they've been experiencing, next year when the budget comes together, which is early next year, they will have to decide, do we spend down more surplus and risk possibly a credit rating downgrade? Do we walk away from some of our spending promises and ambitions? Or do we try to raise taxes somewhere else? And we forget we're coming off, probably not this crowd, $1 billion tax hike that was part of the last budget that was promised to NJ Transit, which needs the money that actually is not initially going to NJ Transit. It's going to the state budget. So structurally, there are definitely issues. Whether they get talked about, and sorry for the long-winded answer, kind of remains to be seen.
Yeah, now, one of the things that we've seen with pretty much all the elections taking place is kind of nationalizing of the election. And so I wanted to see, Matt, if you wanted to weigh in on that for the gubernatorial race. Do you think that that's what we're going to see there? Or do you think we're really going to dig into New Jersey issues? Or is it all going to be national issues? And that's going to be the thrust of it, and Democrat versus Republican?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll see some local Jersey. I mean, offshore wind comes to mind as a Jersey issue, right? I mean, I was thinking about it, like, I grew up in Ocean County in Toms River. It's a huge issue down that way. I live in Metuchen now. It's a non-issue, but I think you'll see some localized kind of issues like that play out within the race. But I mean, the overall backdrop, I think, will be very nationalized. I mean, I just think that's where we are politically. As John mentioned, right? I mean, it'll be the first bellwether post-presidential election too. So you're going to get a lot of whatever is happening nationally just thrown into the race fundamentally because that, right? I mean, it's us and Virginia typically with those first races after the presidential. So, so there's going to be a lot of the national stuff just kind of injected into this, I just think regardless, but it'll be, but I think there are going to be those types of issues. Offshore wind is one that would come to mind that I think will be a heavy battleground issue here in the state.
Thanks, Matt. Anybody else on the panel wanted to weigh in on the gubernatorial, Brent?
Yeah, what Matt just said is actually true and a really good point because we are the first state, us in Virginia, right after a presidential election. And in the past, that usually has played out. It didn't in 2021, meaning Biden was elected president and Murphy then won re-election by a slim margin, or slimmer than expected margin the following year. But that tends to be what happens the year before. This is like a check and balance the following year. So if Harris wins, maybe a Republican slightly more favored to win next year in the gubernatorial race. And if Trump wins, that could give a boost to whatever Democrat comes out of the primary. So, yeah, they always say all politics is local, but lately all politics really has been national.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I wanted to close talking a little bit about Michael Aaron. As Tom Bracken had mentioned, Michael was a mentor to a lot of reporters in New Jersey, had a lasting impact, and he'll be sorely missed. I was wondering if any of you had any thoughts or remembrances of Michael that you'd like to share today. So I'd open it up to the panel to see if anybody would like to say anything.
I can start. I'll say that, believe it or not, I used to be very bad at these kind of I hated these kind of panels and getting on speaking in front of people. And I remember the first time I went on Reporters Roundtable, and Michael could sense my nervousness, and he put me right next to him, and he kind of just was such a calming presence. And just, I learned a lot from him, just watching him. He helped me on Roundtable, but also in press conferences. I would just watch how he didn't have to be the loudest person in the room or to get his question answered. I learned a lot from him, and I'm grateful for all the time I got to spend with him.
Yeah, monumental loss. He was always the coolest guy in the room, more than anything. We could talk about how great of a journalist he was and how and revered he was, but Michael was cool. Liked a lot of good music. Worked for Rolling Stone, had a great voice, and we were talking about this before the show that New Jersey is an embarrassment of things to cover, and he always would say that New Jersey will never let you down if you're a journalist. I mean, it will always let you down First, but there's always something to cover, and Michael was the embodiment of that, and just a massive loss for journalism in our state, and just for the state in general.
Yeah, John, you go.
Fortunately, and it was a weird thing in house when Michael decided to step back, and we were in COVID and Zoom world. So we did sort of a toast online for him, and I said it to him personally at the time that coming into the State House as a young reporter, when Michael was at the top of his game, and how hard he worked, and how committed he was to fairness. I mean, we're kind of spoiled in New Jersey, that he rubbed off on so many of us, the work ethic and the commitment to fairness, because it's really easy to slip away from sort of giving everyone a fair shake. And Michael was really committed to that. And I, had a chance to work with him even behind the scenes. I can tell you that the Michael that people saw on camera is the Michael that you saw behind the scenes. So I appreciate the kind words and what Tom said at the top too. But I think for me, a lasting memory is just he did it the right way. And we're so lucky to have had someone be a role model of his caliber in our state.
Yeah, I would just echo all of that. I mean, just kind of the gold standard journalism. I mean, genuinely cared about the state, delivered day in, day out, truth teller, authentic, and, all the traits you'd want in a journalist. And also good to people, right? Helping young reporters all the time, paying it forward, not big timing people. So just that perfect balance on both the professional and personal side. So a huge loss, but somebody for all of us to emulate for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And
Michael, can I hop in here with a one?
Of course not.
I was very fortunate to be able to go to Michael's funeral, and if any of you were there, you heard the story about the incarcerated gentleman who was convicted of murder that Michael worked on diligently to get released. And it was a story that I as prominent as Michael was, his humility and not really bringing this up. And I had never heard this until his funeral. The combination of professionalism, mentorship, and humility was embedded in Mike. And that story was just so impactful. And it spoke volumes of what Michael was all about. So just wanted to add that to the mix here.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Yeah, and what a kind and warm person. And every interaction I ever had with him, just one of the nicest people I've ever met. And he's sorely missed, and he'll be greatly remembered here in the Garden State. So with that, I want to thank our stellar panel for participating today. This was a great discussion, and I want to thank the Chamber and Tom Bracken for having us here today. And I want to throw it back to Tom for any closing remarks.
Well, Michael, thank you for driving this discussion today. I mean, you covered a lot of topics. The panelists covered in detail many different viewpoints on these topics. Great dialogue, and I appreciate Stacy and Matt and Brent and John for doing this. It's always a good session for us to have these reporters come in and talk about things. And right now, there's probably so many issues that we are dealing with in New Jersey that it was tough to cover all of them, but you happen to be able to moderate that in a way that did cover most of them, Michael. So I appreciate all that. So thank you to you, Michael. Thank you to the reporters on the panel. Thank you to the people on the call. And I need to talk a little bit about the fact that we have some very exciting events coming up for the rest of the year with the Chamber. One is on November the 14th, where we're having our third annual DE&I Trailblazer Awards with along with the co-sponsorship of the African American Chamber. December 4th, we are supporting ROI-NJ in their Champions of the C-Suite Awards reception at the Hanover Manor. Our very popular annual holiday event will take place at Calandra's Italian Village in Caldwell on December the 10th. And then the biggie. February 6th and 7th next year, we're bringing back the Walk to Washington, which is an event that if you've never been on, you should get on. And for those people who have not been on for 5 years, this is going to be a big one. We hope to have most of the, if not all of the gubernatorial candidates on the train. The governor hopefully will be on the train. We're going to meet our congressional delegation in DC. And the one thing I will promise you is the dinner that we always had is modified dramatically. So we're changing that venue so there's much more networking and very few speeches. So please plan on attending the Walk to Washington trip on February 6th and 7th of next year. So thank you to everybody. We appreciate the time you spent with us today, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.